afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Faculty of Law's International Women's Day webinar. My name is Ashley, and I am one of the co-presidents of the Women and the Law Student Club here at U of T Law. Serene is the other co-president of the club, and the both of us are very excited to be moderating today's panel discussion. We are so delighted to have the opportunity to celebrate International Women's Day with all of you and our wonderful panelists. Before we continue, we wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity to work and learn on this land. We are very lucky also to have a wonderful panel of alumni joining us here today. Here with us today are Cherie Brant, a partner at Borden, Ladner, Gervais LLP, JD class of 2002, Justice Rita Maxwell from the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, JD class of 2001, and Maria Zeldis, Senior Vice President, Legal, Onni Group of Companies, JD class of 2009. Following our pre-prepared discussion questions, we will open the floor to audience questions, so please feel free to use the Q&A or chat function in Zoom. To get us started, we'd like to give each of our panelists the opportunity to share a bit about their careers and personal journeys. So Cherie, let's start with you, and then we'll go on to Justice Maxwell and then on to Maria.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ashley. It's so nice to be here. I'm speaking to you today from my home community, which is the Mohawks of the Bay of Quinte. And so it's just really nice to be here. So if I was to start, what I would say is that if you look at my bio, it doesn't really explain how I got here. And so I thought it would be useful to share that information with the group today. So for me, what I started out and my interest was really to work in real estate. My background being Mohawk and Ojibwe, I just understood myself that where I wanted to focus my learning would be to understand the land, our history, and our people. And so that that was my plan, to start in commercial real estate. I ended up starting at a very small firm, actually, sort of thinking back to articling. I was able to get my start at a small law firm. I remember some of the original work I was doing. Our clients were Rogers and Cantel. I was working on easements and leases. And really, I just wanted to learn everything I possibly could about real estate transactions, all with the view to bring those ideas back to my home community and really seek to understand the commercial real estate space and understand how we could look to do development on First Nations lands. And so I, continued my journey, and where I really got my start, I think, was in 2005 when I was able to work with Gardner Roberts. And that was a very interesting time. The markets were really positive for commercial real estate. There was so much activity going on. And then the market crashed in 2008, and people were really not sure what they were going to do. I used that opportunity to really start to look towards an entirely different practice. And so I had already spent several years doing commercial real estate, but then started to look to energy law, energy policy. And I think that's really when I started to hit my stride. I had worked with Indigenous communities on projects relating to what was called the Integrated Power System Plan at the time, and really started to build for myself a practice in the Indigenous law space. And there was nobody else doing it in my firm at the time. I think, I was really just carving out my own road. And really at the time, I felt like I had to build my own practice on my own. And then fast forward, I think I got some really great opportunities. My practice was really growing, and I was able to get a file and work with the Chiefs of Ontario. And I think that's really been the pinnacle of my career. And all along, I'd always been moving to larger and larger law firms. And so, throughout 2016, 2017, we were able to assist 129 First Nations become partners in an acquisition of Hydro One. And I think that was a major turning point for me, really recognized that I had been able to really grow my practice. But as you know, now to be at BLG has really felt like the top of the hill for me. It's, you know, it's always been a climb. It's always been a struggle to get here. And I've been here since 2009, became the national leader in 2021 and haven't looked back.
Great, thank you so much for that, Cherie. That was very, very interesting. And now Justice Maxwell, if you'd like to go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Ashley and Serene, for the invitation, and Wasilla. I'm really honored to be here to be celebrating International Women's Day and to be joined by Maria and Cherie. I'm going to take a tip from Cherie's opening presentation and just tell you about where I started. And because you have my CV, and so you have, you know, some information already about kind of the stops I've made along the way. But I'll tell you a little bit about, you know, sort of who I am, and how I came to be interested and inspired to become a lawyer and eventually become a judge. I grew up in a very small town in northeastern New Brunswick. I'm the daughter of an immigrant from Ghana in West Africa, and my mother was from a very tiny, smaller town than we grew up in, a little bit south of us in New Brunswick. And you know, I think from a very young age, because of the community that I lived in, I became exposed to a lot of the difficulties, sort of social inequities that people experience related to, you know, economic instability, isolation, and just other sort of social challenges and obstacles that really impact the way people's lives unfold and the kind of decisions they make, and sometimes the bad decisions they make. So I think, you know, that experience of growing up in a small town that, you know, had people who were struggling with, you know, sort of just everyday life and economic survival, coupled with my experience of life through the eyes of my father, who did experience, you know, a great degree of discrimination and obstacles in his own life and profession as a doctor. I think all of it really inspired me to want to eventually work in a field that allowed me to work in public service and work in public interest, and have an opportunity to engage with people, you know, whose lives were being impacted by circumstances and ways. And I thought that, you know, as somebody who was interested in advocacy, I did a lot of debating and public speaking, that the perfect kind of environment to marry that interest with, you know, the background that I just described would be in law. And so when I left New Brunswick to go to university, I went to the States, and coming out of my undergrad and thinking about next steps, again, it sort of took me back naturally to my thoughts about law as a good venue for my interests and the way I wanted to contribute to society, I suppose, on a professional level. I started out initially on Bay Street in a big firm, and I'll tell you probably a little bit more about that later. It was a great experience, but, you know, over time, the pull toward public service work, I felt it pretty strongly, and when an opportunity presented itself to work, you know, in sort of public service capacity by becoming an assistant crown in criminal law, which was always an area of interest for me, I took it, and then, you know, there was no turning back after that for me. So I spent the majority of my career practicing in criminal law as a crown, and I had, you know, some, you know, different experiences within the context of criminal law that, you know, allowed me to see things sort of from the defense side of things, from an international perspective. I've had a few twists and turns in my career that have let me explore criminal law from a lot of different lenses. And all of that sort of eventually led to my being in a place where I felt that I had done a number of the things that I had hoped to do as a lawyer, and there were there was interest and suggestions that it might be time that I consider applying to the bench, and things kind of went from there. So I sat on the Ontario Court of Justice at Old City Hall from 2017 until 2021. And then I was appointed to the Superior Court of Justice in 2021, and that's where I am now. So that's sort of me in a nutshell, but I'm very pleased to be here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey, Justice Maxwell. As a daughter of immigrant parents myself, a lot of what you said really resonated with me. So it was great to hear all of that. And now we'll move on to Maria to answer a question.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. It feels great to be back at U of T, albeit virtually. So I think, yeah, I'll kind of follow the same response style as the two previous panelists. I think everyone got a copy or can look up the CV that was posted. So I kind of want to talk about things that maybe are not mentioned in there. I guess from the very start, or almost the very start, I came to Canada when I was 9 years old. I'm originally from Ukraine. At the time, it was still the Soviet Union. So I came here kind of end of elementary school. My parents were working class immigrants. We didn't really have a lot of money. I didn't really, have a network of professionals. I didn't really know any lawyers. It wasn't a career path that I had considered for myself. But I was able to get into university. I attended UBC for my undergrad. And while I was working at UBC to pay for tuition, I was working part-time, which tuition only cost that much back then. So you could just work part-time to pay for school. So I got a job at a notary public as kind of like a legal assistant admin type role. And notary publics do a lot of residential real estate transactions. So kind of my first foray into that was through residential real estate. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the intellectual aspect of it. Like, I love learning about different land rights and what's on title and how that all fits together. And I also really enjoyed the tangible nature of it. So I would work on this file and then I would see this family come and sign their documents, and that's their first home, which happened a lot more frequently, again, because back then people could afford homes. So that was really neat. And I just thought, well, this is really interesting to me. And I thought about pursuing it kind of on a bigger scale and going to law school. I applied to U of T, I think, like kind of as a joke, because I didn't think that I would ever get in. So got really lucky there and I just took the opportunity. It was a really big move for me because I had come to Canada, lived in BC and Vancouver pretty much that whole time, and I'd never really been to Ontario ever before. So I came out to see U of T, like to tour the university beforehand. And I just was in awe of the law school. I just thought it would be like the greatest experience for me, and also to kind of get out of my comfort zone, having been in the same place for a long time. So I went to U of T, but at the end of the day, West Coast, Best Coast. So I came back really fast. After I graduated from U of T, I came back and clerked at the BC Supreme Court. And then I finished my articles at Borden, Ladner, Gervais, where I was an associate for 3 years in their real estate group. And then, that just was like the obvious path of least resistance for somebody that didn't really have a lot of connections, didn't know a lot of people and what other opportunities were available to law graduates. That just was like the natural path, because you go to OCIs and you get this job and then, it just flows through. But I think at a certain point, when I was an associate, I became more aware of what was out there, and I sort of started to realize, like, I don't think that this is ultimately the path for me. And I started to think about going in-house, and that appealed to me for various reasons. And so I got my first in-house job 4 years after being called, which seemed like really early and was probably a bit early at the time. But I was really happy. I got a job at a big real estate company in the Vancouver office, and I worked there for 5 years doing a lot of leasing and just like general real estate related work. And then about 4 years ago, I came to the Onni Group, which is also a Vancouver-based developer. And I was kind of in shared responsibility role at first. So I was working with 2 other senior lawyers in the US and Canada, managing kind of the entire portfolio between us or among us. And then a couple years ago, that changed for me, and I am now responsible for virtually everything in the legal group, which has been a big shift and adjustment and huge learning curve, but also at the same time, super interesting and exciting, and kind of like sometimes pinch myself and think like, I can't believe that I already have this dream job that I kind of thought would take so much longer to get to. So I feel very fortunate in that regard. Yeah, and I really enjoy my work. I still really love the conceptual real estate landscape, like Cherie was saying, and also really enjoy working in-house because I get to work with a lot of really smart people. I get to work with, our engineers and our planners and our development managers that all know their area really well, and I get to talk to them about all that stuff and learn about the wonderful intricacies of HVAC or whatever it is. But then I also get to work with really brilliant external lawyers when we have a serious problem that we need to deal with. I get to call up whoever at the firm that we use and get their expertise, and that's always a great experience as well.
Thank you very much for sharing, Maria. I think a lot of that resonated with us, especially that initial shock getting into U of T and the privilege that it's been ever since. And thank you all very much for sharing a little bit about your careers and your personal journeys that have led you to these very senior and very incredible positions. Now moving on, can you each share with us something that surprised you along the way? Justice Maxwell, how about you get us started?
Yeah, thanks, Serene. I could say there are a number of things that surprised me along the way about having a career in law. The interest that I ended up having in corporate commercial litigation and medical malpractice, which was where I focused my work in the beginning of my career when I worked in civil litigation. That was somewhat of a surprise. I hadn't necessarily thought that I would be as interested and engaged in that work as I was. Other projects that I got involved in, again, were things that I didn't necessarily consider, to be areas that I'd be interested in, and they turned out to be really great and rewarding experiences. But I think overall, I would say one of the things that has surprised me most along the way, and I speak more now as a lawyer, just because there's more time to draw on, was really the ability to pivot and pursue passion projects as much as I did. I think oftentimes we think of law and the journey through law as being kind of a very linear process that's got plot points along a line, and you kind of need to stay on the line, or you're gonna find yourself in the wilderness without a job. And I didn't find that, and I think I probably shared that point of view when I started law school. Like most people, we worry about, when am I going to be able to work when I get out of law school? What am I going to be doing? But I have always by nature been someone who likes to follow my instincts, and once I get something in my mind that I think it could be interesting to pursue, I pursue it wholeheartedly. And I was pleasantly surprised over the course of my career as a lawyer to find that not only could I do that it was possible, but that people really embraced it. And a lot of the pivots and the turns that I made, I think, are in large part the reason why I've been able to come to the position that I'm in now as a judge. And so, for example, as I think I alluded to in my opening comments, as a Crown attorney, I spend most of my career in trials, in downtown Toronto. But I took time away from my work as a Crown to pursue things that were of interest to me, and that included going to get my LLM sort of 7 or 8 years into my career in international human rights and humanitarian law and criminal law. And people did say to me when I said I'm going to go do this, kind of, what for? you don't need it to practice domestic criminal law. It may not really help for any kind of long-term goal. But it was something I was always interested in, and ended up being, one of the most impactful experiences that I had in my sort of professional life, because it turned into a lot of relationships with people working in the field of international law. It turned into an experience at the International Criminal Court as a legal advisor. It spun off other incredibly interesting experiences while I was in the United States, because I was doing my LLM at Georgetown. And I became involved with a collaborative project between Georgetown Law and the Mid-Atlantic Innocence Project. And I worked on a case for the entire year of a man who had been convicted and was incarcerated for a murder, and had been incarcerated for over 20 years. And the Innocence Project had taken his case on, related to a theory of exoneration that was a viable theory, and that turned on this whole issue of gunshot residue and what it can prove and what it can't prove. That case was incredibly interesting. It was an odyssey, and it resulted in his exoneration in the end. And so, those are not things that I necessarily would have thought of when I graduated from law school, that, these are things I want to do, or these are things that are going to fit in well with a particular job that I'm doing at a particular time. But, when you kind of follow your instincts and you follow, something that seems interesting, it's quite incredible the kind of opportunities that can flow from it. And as I say, I don't think at the end of the day, I could be wrong, I'll never know, no one will ever tell me, but I think that those experiences that I had along the way made for a more sort of complete and interesting picture of who I am, and who I wanted to be as a judge. And so it didn't necessarily take away from what ended up being a goal of mine, which was to be on the bench. So the ability to pivot, the flexibility in the legal career is something that I think I was pleasantly surprised by.
Thank you very much, Justice Maxwell. It's good to hear as 2L students that we don't have to have it all quite figured out. How about we move on next to Maria?
Sure. So what surprised me? Well, a lot of things, because as I mentioned, I really didn't know what this experience was going to be, and I didn't, have a chance to talk to people that maybe would be my mentors that would kind of guide me along the way. So everything has been very new. But when I was thinking about this question, I was kind of trying to, frame it within the context of this event and Women's Day. And I was thinking about kind of what surprised me as a woman entering law. And I think one thing that surprised me was just how prevalent gender discrimination still was and is. I was really surprised by that, because kind of up to that point, I had sort of been able to fit in everywhere really easily. Like I'm an easygoing person. I like sports, like, stupid stuff like that. You're like, oh, I get along with guys great. Like, it's going to be easy. And then you walk into it and you face like real barriers. And, a lot of like frustrating things that I noticed, like I thought, well, it's the older generation, but then I would have interactions with male colleagues that were my generation that had very similar views. And that was really frustrating, because you think to yourself, like, no, our generation has moved past certain things. So I wasn't expecting to still face such powerful barriers in the workplace. And I think one of the mistakes that I made was thinking that I could overpower it with my own actions sometimes. So I would think to myself, well, I just have to work harder. Like, I just have to prove to these guys that, I'm worth it. And, I'll just be like the top. And I would run on that treadmill for a long time and exhaust myself. And at the end of it, have nothing to show for it. And then realize foolishly, like, oh, it actually doesn't matter what I do, because this person had their opinion set of me the minute that I walked into the room. And there's nothing I can really do in this situation to change it. And I have to go somewhere else. And so sometimes the choices that I've made in my career were just that the result of that realization of like, I'm not going to be invested in to the extent that I feel I deserve here, and so I just need to move forward. So I do think that that is getting better. I mean, so I've been doing this for about 13, 14 years or so, and just even in that time, I feel like things have shifted. But when I first started, it was a real shock to me and a real surprise, because I was kind of thinking that things would just be really smooth, and you know, they weren't terrible, but they also were not as smooth as I'd hoped.
Thanks so much for sharing, Maria. So sorry to hear about all of the experiences that you faced. Hopefully with over 56% of the class of 2025's 1L enrollment being female this year at U of T Law, and with incredible alums such as yourselves, we can help to continue to promote one another in all of our future careers, and hopefully things will continue to go in the right direction. Maybe we can finish this off with Cherie.
Sure. You know what, I was thinking about this question and thinking like maybe to speak about it and, you know, what was surprising for me. You know, at the time when I had joined at U of T, we had 10 other Indigenous students there at the same time. And I was really, I believe I was one of the only persons who wanted to practice, who wanted to create a commercial practice. And I think what was really surprising was, you know, the consensus was that if you were interested in Indigenous law, you needed to be a litigator. You wanted to be a litigator. You had to be a litigator. And, you know, you would have to focus on constitutional law cases and look to expand what would be considered Aboriginal laws and treaty rights. And all of that, for me, what was really, for me personally, that was too big of a hill to climb. That was very emotional for me as an individual, as a, you know, Ojibwe and Mohawk person. I thought, I can't start that fight. That's a 10-year fight. That's a 15-year fight. Those are fights that, you know, I didn't have any sense that I could win or succeed in those fights. And I thought, this is just going to be too emotional. I can't do it. I won't succeed. And so I had chosen this commercial path. And I love the way how Maria was talking about real estate being tangible. Like, that was exactly my mantra, which was like, I can do this. This is in a nice little package. You know, it's building, it's financing, it's project development, it's A to Z. And this is something that I can, you know, that I can wrap my mind around and feel that I could succeed in. You know, I feel like when you think about like what was so surprising is that it has exactly become the area of practice that we are always trying to encourage our you know, future BLGers, right, to get interested in, because it does represent part of the future, is to focus on that commercial side. And if you think about the Indian Act itself, it's interesting. You can reflect and look at the Indian Act and see, you know, all sorts of exclusion. And, you know, I identify with that. You can look at the Indian Act and see all the paternalism in those provisions. And you can look at the cases and really see that there's still a ton of protectionism that's built into the Indian Act. But if you look at the community, if you look at Indigenous people, like what we're really seeking is kind of to be on the other side, right? We're really seeking commercial outcomes. And, you know, you can look at these different provisions in the Indian Act and they relate to tax, right? Section 87 rights are tax-based rights. Section 89 on you know, limiting seizure of personal property. Like, if we're going to figure out a way to solve these problems, there are going to be, you know, commercial initiatives that we need to come up with to push the envelope, and maybe we'll get someday to some legislative changes. But to me, it's interesting and surprising that the Indian Act actually needs a ton of commercial solutions to be brought to bear, and requires parties to come together, you know, which corporate Canada, right, to come together to get to better solutions. So I would say what was really surprising is that I've been able to create, you know, what will be 19 years of a career just doing exclusively commercial work, with very much a public policy outlook with, seeking to have a public policy impact. So that's been the exciting part.
Great. Thank you for that, Cherie, and for all of your unique and candid answers. I think for us as law students, it's really great to kind of have that takeaway that our careers aren't just defined from the outset, and we never know what kind of opportunities might come up along the way. And also to know to really keep a lookout for looking for kind of environments where we're being valued and invested in. If that's not the case, maybe moving on and looking for where we can find that. And so moving on to our next question, it's really great to have so many career paths represented here today. Judiciary, partner in a larger firm, and an in-house role. So we'd love to hear about what you would describe as a more rewarding part of your job. And Cherie, we'll start with you here again, if that's okay.
Okay, sure. I would say it's interesting. The most rewarding part, and this, I've said this a few times, but it's really to work with First Nations communities and take them through the process of what I call, learning how to accept risk, right? Do commercial transactions, learn how to take sort of that calculated risk and move the dial and move towards a transactional outcome. One of the very first deals I'd worked on, the community had never borrowed, had never entered into a commercial loan. And so we had to take the community through that process. I think, that was the most rewarding, and it's amazing. I'm always just still looking for that same experience, because once you get through it, the community has, built all sorts of internal capacity and actually starts to build its own confidence and excitement and interest to do more. So I'm still solving the same problems I've been solving for the last 20 years or 19 years, however you want to look at it. And I think that I can still continue with a practice doing the same thing. I'm not really looking to do anything different. I just want to do more of it, and I want to build the team that's going to do more of it, and I can't do it alone. So I think that's been the most rewarding part, is to help the communities take on risk, learn to develop projects, and work towards self-determination and autonomy for themselves.
Thank you. That's really great to hear and very inspiring to know that as someone who's also interested in corporate commercial law, that you can still kind of work to empower marginalized communities and take on that role as well. And next we'll go to Justice Maxwell for this question.
I'll speak now of my current role as a judge, and there are many things that are incredibly rewarding about doing this role. My colleagues are extraordinary, brilliant minds. We have all different perspectives, life experiences, but there's tremendous collegiality among us, and it's been wonderful to learn from them, with them, and I feel very fortunate to be part of this. I think one thing that I find to be particularly rewarding about this job is the ability to impact the community, and that could be our entire sort of provincial or national community, and it can be sort of just on a very individual level. So obviously, sitting and participating in the creation of jurisprudence that will impact all of our lives in some way, if issues are then reviewed by higher courts and become the law of the land, is an incredible privilege to be involved in. And there are many areas of the law that I see, that haven't yet, had a lot of jurisprudence on them. So every case presents a new opportunity to potentially contribute to that fabric, and that's a very special opportunity to have. On an individual and on sort of a personal level, it's incredibly important to me to be part of what people talk about when we say, and we talk about the bench reflecting the community that we serve. And I'm very honored to be on the bench and be able to play a part in constructing our jurisprudence, but it's also incredibly important to me that to some extent those who come before me can appreciate that I come from, a different background than somebody else next door in the next courtroom. I have a different life experience as a visible minority, as a woman, as somebody who, is on the younger end for being a judge. And I think all those perspectives enhance public's confidence in the administration of justice, that the bench reflects all people who it's meant to serve. And being able to be in that position is incredibly rewarding. And then, lastly, I will say that the individual relationships that we sometimes have an opportunity to make with justice participants is really wonderful. At the Superior Court of Justice, just given the nature of the work that we do here and the seriousness of a lot of the offenses, there are fewer opportunities to sort of engage on a very one-on-one level with, for example, accused persons. But in the Ontario Court of Justice, where there's there's more variety in terms of the kinds of courts that we run, and there's an emphasis, for example, on therapeutic courts like the drug treatment court, GLADU court, the mental health court, where the courts are working in a much more collaborative fashion with different stakeholders within the community to try to create solutions to a cycle of behavior that is bringing the person back and forth through the system. And so, obviously the law and what is the issue that's brought the person there is important, and we're dealing with that, in the background. But there's a different priority, and there's different focus in those kinds of courts. And there you get a chance to really work with people one-on-one and understand their lives and understand the decisions that they've made and the changes they hope to make, and support them in those changes. And that was a wonderful part of being part of the Ontario Court of Justice.
Thank you so much for that. All of that sounds really great, and it's wonderful to hear kind of your perspective on the judiciary's role within the community at large. And now we'll move on to Maria to answer the question.
Okay, so thinking about what is extra rewarding in my job, it's hard to choose. I had to go with two things. The first one is working on real estate projects. You're the paper pusher, you're working on these agreements that are very theoretical, nebulous. You don't really know, kind of how it's going to work out. And sometimes you work on them for a really long time, like kind of pre-construction, and it takes years for you to see the outcome of your work. But when you do, it's epic. So a few months ago, my colleagues and I had a chance to go out and see a development that I'd been working on since day one, that I've been at Onni. It's located on the Tawasin First Nation, and it started out as basically a giant field of nothing. And so we'd been working on it prior to me joining Onni. People had been working on that project for years already. So when I came on, it was already in progress. And we went to see, fully finished townhome units for residents. We went to see an amenity building that is just incredible. Like there's a pool, a gym, I think there's a golf simulator. And then on the face of the building was this like incredibly beautiful public art that had been done by a local artist. And it was just like amazing. It was the culmination of all this work that we had put into it, and to see it kind of all come to fruition, and to know that people are going to be living there, like that's going to be serving the community, and people are going to be enjoying something that I produced, is really great. So that's one. And there's another project where I live in Burnaby. There's another huge project that we're working on that I drive past every day, and I kind of get to see right now, it's a high rise. So they're putting, literally the bricks are going up, and every week that I drive by, it's higher and higher. Like that's really cool. And then the other thing that's really rewarding about my role that isn't specific to real estate necessarily is just, I love teaching. I love helping people kind of develop their practice and think about what's best for them in their career. Obviously, I was only able really to start doing that kind of more recently as I became more senior in my role, but I've really enjoyed, I'm a mentor through the Women Lawyers Forum, through the CBA. And like, I really look forward to those chats with those women lawyers, and kind of watching them sometimes like truly find themselves in these conversations and realize what their values are, what's important to them, what decisions they want to make. It just feels great. And that's another component that I really, really enjoy.
Thank you all so much. It was great to hear how rewarding each of your respective careers have been, no matter how different they are. Now moving on to an International Women's Day specific question. Our theme this year is #EmbraceEquity, to highlight the difference between equity and equality, noting that equal opportunities are no longer enough. We're wondering if you could each speak a little bit to what that sentiment means to you. And perhaps, Maria, we can go back to you to start this one.
Sure. Well, I'm by no means an expert in this, so this will just be kind of my cursory opinion, but I think to me, equity is the understanding that change can't just happen from the bottom up. It has to happen from the top down. And I think for a long time, we all subscribe to this. And even myself, I was a true believer in like, no, if we are all just little peons starting at the bottom and we all have equal opportunity, then at the end of the day, when it filters out to the top, it's going to be equitable and everybody is going to be there fairly because there was equal opportunity down below. And that's just like, that's not true. I mean, I think this might still actually be controversial for some people, but I just don't know how. So to me, change can only happen when we, of course, create equity for everyone, kind of, let's say, in law, everyone entering has equal opportunity, but there also needs to be equity at the top. And that may seem to some people like it's being forced or whatever, but when you're coming through whatever career you're in and you don't see anybody that represents you at the top, number one, that discourages you from pursuing, higher goals. And number two, if everybody at the top remains the same and those people are the decision makers, then how is there ever going to be equity for the people that are down below? Like, it's just the whole top-down economics thing, it doesn't work. And I know that may upset some folks who have enjoyed being at the top for a long time, and it seems unfair to them because they are genuinely hard workers and good people, and like, why are they being targeted and all this? But that's just those are my thoughts. I would love to hear what the other folks on the panel have to say about that.
Absolutely. Cherie, do you want to follow up on that one?
Yeah, sure. Okay, let me jump in with what I wanted to say, but I want to pick up on what Maria said after as well. So, for me, looking at it from an Indigenous lens, I've said this a few times already, in my mind, equity does not mean equality. And it's a bit of something to unpack, right? Like, we're not, from the Indigenous lens perspective, as, First Nations, recognizing we're First Nations, Inuit, and Métis as far as Canada goes, I think it's really difficult for us to be constantly looking for equal outcomes, right? In the sense of, what comes to my mind is, and I've felt this pressure in multiple situations where, we have governments that are saying, well, why can't everybody just get along? Why can't we just get along? Or we've had situations where governments are trying to push collective transactions. Well, why don't you all just get in the partnership together? Everybody has an equal interest, let's wrap it up, let's move on. And so that's where I come to from saying, equity does not mean equality, because from the Indigenous perspective, we all have different rights. We're on different journeys. We have all sorts of, I think, as to what Justice Maxwell was saying, I agree. There's lots of cases that still need to come before the courts to address some really important issues, in particular around how First Nations are going to solve overlapping interests and rights. So it's not enough to say, why don't we just make it all equal, right? I do a ton of transactions where there's time pressure, there's pressure from the government to come up with an outcome that involves Indigenous groups. There's interest on the corporate side to say, let's get this to the finish line so we don't delay and we can, as Canadians, be proud that these linear projects are actually being developed. It's just not that simple is the challenge. So I'm always sort of pushing towards the fact that there may be situations where we don't have equal outcomes, but they are equitable and people are happy and satisfied with them. We still have a big problem in Canada with, you sort of look to the duty to consult issues where much of the outcomes are being pushed on corporate Canada to come up with the solution. And so, you know, it's challenges, you know, maybe the courts are not the right place to decide, you know, what is equitable among parties. It would be better to say, like, figure it out yourself, right? The challenge with that is that these deals are still happening behind closed doors, and parties, you know, have, you know, inequities among those parties create different outcomes. And so, you know, we need more. I did my first mining deal not that long ago, and sort of when I sort of look at the mining transactions, the duty to consult in the mining space, and I look at the duty to consult in the energy space, both of those areas, you know, are very different in terms of what they're looking towards to bring outcomes for Indigenous communities. So I think there's still a ton of work to be done on that side. But something that Maria said really resonated with me. So I've sat on the board of directors since 2018 for Hydro One and TD Bank since 2021. And I'm really proud, but the work that we've had to do was very much a top-down approach. And so I agree that the hard work has to be done at that board level. And in my experience, what we were doing was really just trying to, if I sort of take a look back, what did I see, right? The messaging was coming from the board level to give, you know, management comfort that they could actually execute on these initiatives. And so I think we absolutely need more of that top-down approach in terms of governance. I think that we'll be able to move the needle and move the dial. And of course, not everybody will be happy about it, but that's not my problem to fix. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was all very well said. Justice Maxwell, do you have anything to add other to Maria or Cherie's point, or anything that you wanted to note?
You know, not much. Maria and Cherie both spoke incredibly well and eloquently, and made incredibly important points about, you know, the idea that, just to pick up on the very last point, change coming from the top and working down. I think that's absolutely right, and to, you know, really strive for true equity. We need people in the higher, you know, echelons of industry or whatever it might be, who believe in the notion that there are a lot of different ways that people can be great, and there's a lot of different qualities and values that make one person great that may be completely different from what makes another person great, but that there isn't only one definition of how to be a leader in the field, or how to be an expert, or how to be the boss or the CEO. And, you know, that is something that, you know, sort of takes time, and it takes multiple processes working at the same time. It takes people like, you know, the next generation of lawyers, for example, presenting themselves and celebrating, you know, the things that they bring that are maybe distinct and different from what, you know, previous generations brought, but have, you know, tremendous potential and will grow from there. And of course, it takes people at the top recognizing the value of different perspectives and different life experiences. And so, you know, that's what true equity means to me, is recognizing that we need to start changing definitions of, you know, what makes people leaders, what makes them great, what makes them, you know, sort of worthy of the positions of leadership. And, you know, the second sort of corollary point I'd make to it is that we need to keep working on creating environments in, you know, upper echelon and senior spaces that make it possible for, you know, women, for example, to thrive, and recognize that, you know, there are competing interests and commitments that, you know, we have, as do men, but you know, with family, with children, with you know, other commitments outside of work, that we don't want to necessarily give up, and that's not a weakness. That's a compliment to what we're bringing, is that, you know, we have all these other commitments going on in our lives, and that creating a space and a culture where that's not seen as something that people need to work around, but is really rather something that's seen as value added, because of the expanded perspective we bring because of our outside involvement in other activities, whether it's family or community involvement, whatever it might be. I think that that's also something that has to continue to evolve and change, so that we can see true equity in the higher ranks of all different professions, but law included.
Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives to this question. I think it's a very important and sometimes difficult conversation to have, so it's really great to hear what you all think about that. Moving on now to our next question. So pay inequity continues to be a problem in the legal profession. A recent Globe and Mail investigation revealed that women on average earn 20% less compared to their male counterparts in top Toronto law firms. And an article in Canadian Lawyer magazine also noted similar inequity for in-house positions. Now that there is more awareness of this issue, are you seeing positive steps to close this pay inequity gap? And we'll start with Cherie for this question, if that's okay.
All right. Okay, so for this question, I feel like there's a couple things I wanted to share. So I know as far as myself goes, I'm not, I don't sit around the governance tables at BLG. I'm a partner at the law firm. And so I'm not really in a good place to comment on that piece. I know, everybody, there's obviously initiatives that are being taken. But if I was to share what I would say on this topic is that, individual lawyers, female lawyers need to very much be aware of what their compensation are. And I think we're all going to know, when we're not being paid enough, I think, or if we know that we want to be paid more, right? And my approach has been to move to another place, like find that other place where you are going to be recognized for what you bring to the table. If you sort of look at my LinkedIn, and I was trying to say this in the opening, like I've literally jumped from place to place to place. I made sure I never left too early. I made sure that I was leaving at the right time. But every time I was leaving, it was because I wanted to improve my own personal circumstance. I either was striving towards becoming a partner, or I wanted to get paid better. And when somebody was interested in me, I used that as an opportunity. I said, if this is, I can either stay in the status quo, and I think one of the speakers might have been going to this point, like, no one's ever going to see the hard work that you're doing. It's just not that, it just doesn't happen that way. It's not like those lights just going to come on and come down and go, oh, Maria, you've done it. We've seen that, we've, take you aside and sort of put you in this fifth dimension and tell you, pat you on the back. It never happens that way, right? And it's like, you have to take it for yourself. Take what you get, take what you want, go get it, go find it, make it happen, right? So if somebody shows an interest in you, always think of that as an opportunity to improve your circumstance. And that's exactly what I've done. I've absolutely capitalized on that. And I'm, very proud of where I am. I also don't have a problem with sharing that with others. I believe that we have to, if we're going to change things, we have to actually, like, what do they say? Open the kimono, right? We have to talk about it more and show people how to actually do it for themselves. And in my mind, like, that's what I'm all about, right? Figure it out, figure out how to take that strategic opportunity and get it. It's yours, you deserve it, right? The other piece that I would say is all firms are different. People need to understand that there are different cultures at different law firms. I feel like, we take the view that, maybe we always, we talk about the Seven Sisters, and that's where everybody wants to go and practice at the outset. And we have maybe a different view of mid-market or whatever, but each firm has a culture. And I think it's incumbent on us to understand those cultures and figure out which one do we want to be in? Where do we see ourselves? And figure out that culture, and that's where you go. That's the place that, and your instincts are going to tell you where to go. So I'm not the policy person that's looking towards directing change, but you know, anybody want an individual coach, I will be right there for you.
Thank you for that. I think that's really great, practical and tangible advice for all the students here, and something I haven't really heard before. It can be kind of scary to think about just moving to a new place, but it's, you know, great to know that that is something that we should be looking out for and taking advantage of given the circumstances. And Maria, we'd love to hear your perspective on this as well.
Yeah, sure. So I guess my perspective is kind of different because working in-house, we're not as tied to kind of the law firm standard ranges. I feel like a lot of law firms, especially like big law firms, they kind of all pay the same in their lockstep, et cetera. So it's a very different market. And when I was thinking about this question, I kind of, I felt like it was a very good news, bad news kind of thing, where on the one hand, I, feel really good about some things. On the other hand, I'm very pessimistic about other things. So my thought process is, I started off being a little bit pessimistic just because we've now gone through the pandemic. And, I read something that said that the pay gap was closing up until kind of the early 2000s. And then it stagnated. I think now women are at like 80 cents on the dollar and it hasn't really budged. And then COVID happened. And what I saw was a lot of women having to make the choice to, or being forced into, not really a choice, of kind of stepping away from their careers to look after family, even in situations where I felt like, well, I feel like that friend of mine is actually the higher earner, like what's going on in, and I saw that, especially I think in different areas of the country, there was a greater impact. In BC, our schools were closed for the end of one school year, and then they reopened the subsequent year. But I think that in Ontario, many schools continue to be closed like into the following year, and that maybe had an even bigger impact on mothers, on parents. So just seeing that, I kind of felt a little bit like, I don't know how this is going to go, and I kind of want to see, like, I'm sure there's going to be statistics that come out in the next few years, like really honing in on the impact that that had on women in the workplace. So that kind of made me go, oh, that's not so great. But at the same time, the things that I'm seeing just in my anecdotal little existence in my office in Vancouver, one thing that's making me feel better about the future of pay equity for women is just that the next generation of women is not afraid to ask for what they are worth. And like, I think there's a couple of my colleagues on my team on this call, but like, they know how I feel about this. It's really hard for me as a manager, but I would rather it be that way than have somebody on my team that is not being paid equitably, right? So I feel like younger women are more open to having the conversation. I'm sure it's still really stressful, but they go for it. And that's not something that I ever did. Like, I'm exactly like Cherie, like I have only negotiated my salary when moving to a different workplace. I've never really renegotiated when I'm, in the job already. So that's really positive news. I feel like, the younger women are more open to having that conversation. And then kind of how this all fits together is when you think about compensation, it's on the one hand good, on the other hand bad. It compounds over time. So if you start off being underpaid in job one, and then, then you move to job two and you're negotiating your salary, most of the time they're going to offer you something that's based on what you were earning before. Or if you're in a job and you're getting promoted within the company, or you're getting annual increases, well, that annual increase is based on what you were earning last year. So if you're constantly underpaid, then, in year one, it's only like this much of a difference. But by the time you get to year 20, 25, it could potentially be huge. And so on the one hand, this is a very scary fact because it really stresses me out. Like, am I falling behind? On the other hand, it's really, if you know that, then I feel like it empowers you a little bit more, because you think to yourself, yes, this is only about $3,000 right now or whatever, but this $3,000 is going to add up to be a lot more in the future. And so it is still important to ask and to have that conversation. So I don't know if that was helpful at all. I'm kind of all over the place on this, but overall, maybe like slightly optimistic.
No, thank you. That was definitely very helpful. And I had never really thought about kind of that long-term impact of it before. So it's great to kind of have some awareness about that. And Justice Maxwell, I'm not sure if there's anything that you maybe wanted to add to this question.
No, I think Maria and Cherie really covered it off very well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. So we have our last moderated question now before we turn to questions from the audience. So our last question is, what advice would you give to our students who are about to embark on career journeys? And what do you hope for our generation of female leaders? Perhaps we'll start with Justice Maxwell.
I think that the best advice that I can give to the next generation is to be true to yourself. And, you know, especially in the early stages, we feel some degree of pressure to, you know, conform to what we think a lawyer should be, or the way a lawyer should act, or what it's going to take to fit in with the culture of a particular place that you work. That's a facade that I think one can only keep up for so long, and then it will start to kind of eat at you, and your productivity level will start to wane, and you know it's a self-defeating kind of situation. Be true to yourself. Have the confidence to be, you know, who you are, and you know, as Maria was saying in relation to pay equity issues, don't be afraid to ask for things that you think you are suited for, that you think you're entitled to. If the work isn't what you want it to be, go get better work, so that, you know, when the time comes and the decisions have to be made by you, you know, as to whether you're in the right spot at the right time, you'll know that you will have, you know, done your best to use the opportunity that you had to get as much out of it as you could. And I think that's incredibly important. Like, don't be intimidated or afraid to say what you want and say what it is that you think you can bring to the table in making those requests. That would be my advice.
Thank you so much. We'll move to Cherie next.
All right. If I'm thinking towards students embarking on their career journey, I would be saying you really need, in my mind, and what's worked for me is really picking your path, right? Choosing what, you know, for me, it was choosing what I want to fix, what I want to change, right? It was really identifying what are those barriers, what are those challenges that I just want to like break down and eliminate. And I really think that is key, and it will be different for everyone, right? But it's pick your space and make sure to find out how you're going to develop it, expand on the topic. Maybe it's going to be writing, maybe it will be speaking. You know, for me it was conferences, right? I was really just always trying to get out there to talk to people and, you know, raise awareness on topics. But, you know, that may not work for everyone, right? But if it's not that, then it's writing about these topics. But you have to find something that you're passionate about. And, you know, it was simple for me in a sense. There's lots of issues to be dealt with. There's tons of things that need to be fixed within, you know, the journey for Indigenous communities. So I really think that it's been about trying to figure out, how are you going to self-actualize? How are you going to individualize yourself and express yourself and find your voice? I think it, you know, does chime on to what Justice Maxwell was saying. And, you know, it shouldn't sound repetitive. It's just, it's real, right? If you find it, doors open up, all sorts of things open up that, you know, you really just have to be there, be present, express what your individuality, self-actualize. And, you know, truthfully, I've found that everything is just fallen into place, right? But it requires careful attention. And I've had the benefit of being able to do that. I credit a lot of it with my First Nations culture, my spirituality. I spent time in my youth very much focusing on my Indigenous teachings and all of our traditional teachings that we use as our methods of growth, and I've been able to draw upon all that stuff as I go through in my life. And so you really have to find those things that work for you. And I think, to Justice Maxwell's point, if it's just not clear, then it's not right. Like, you just kind of got to figure that out. And I think we all have that ability to find that piece. And I also feel like, having got to law school, like, everybody has already been on an incredible journey, right? And it for whatever reason, it always feels like this is new, right? But you really need to give yourself credit for everything you've already done, right? It's that gratitude piece. Like, not everybody can be where everybody is. Not everybody will get to go to U of T Law School, right? So give yourself credit for what you've done, but now you really have to do the hard work, is make sure that you're contributing back. And that's what I've constantly done, is always made sure to contribute back. I do a ton of volunteer work, and I wouldn't be the person that I am without that work. So
Thank you so much. Even just coming back here today, we really appreciate all of you giving back in that way. This has been such an incredible event. I can only speak for Ashley and I, but we've learned so much from all of you. So thank you. Maria, is there anything that you wanted to add to conclude our moderated?
So in terms of what I hope for the next generation, or what advice I would give, well, don't make the same mistakes I did. To a couple in particular. So things that I've kind of learned along the way that I would love for others to know and maybe save them the time and trouble is, the first thing really is that your career, for most people, kind of average age entering law school, it's going to be very long, several decades long, and it's a marathon, not a sprint. I very much sprinted right from the start, wanting to accomplish everything right away, just working a lot, kind of not caring for myself as much as I should. And really, honestly, only in the past year or so, when it has started to impact my health and my relationships, my life, I've kind of taken a step back and been like, why am I rushing? And I've kind of slowed down. So my motto right now this year is slow and steady is healthy and sustainable. Everything will happen in good time. We often see people that are only like 5 or 7 years older than us or ahead of us, and we think, well, I basically do what that person does. Why can't I be in that role or do that thing? But 5 to 7 years is a long time in your professional career. So just not to get caught up in that, and just pace yourself, take care of yourself. Not everything has to happen at once. I would say that's really important. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have for that.
Thank you all so much for that. As Serene said, I've definitely learned so much by listening to all of you speak, and it's been very, very valuable. So thank you all so much for that advice. I know it's definitely something that I'll be keeping with me going forward. And now I think we have time for a couple of questions from our attendees. So the first one that we have here asks, what was the largest challenge as a woman in law school, and what advice would you give current or upcoming women who are interested in pursuing their law degrees? And maybe for this one, we can start with Justice Maxwell.
I think that it may not be sort of unique to being a law student, because I think this probably translates to, once you're a junior lawyer or, really anywhere along the way. But, I think for women, there is always a feeling of almost like imposter syndrome, even just as a law student, even though, everybody else in the class are just law students too. I think it can be challenging in a competitive environment like a law school to not somehow, get the sense that, the school's made a mistake in admitting you, or not feeling like you can't really compete with the other people who are in your class. You know, that can be a real obstacle for the kind of things you pursue going forward, right? If you let that kind of mindset set in too much. And in a competitive environment of a law school, I think that can pretty easily happen. And it can happen more, and not to generalize, but I think, you know, women can fall kind of prey to that kind of thinking in a hyper-competitive environment of a law school. So, you know, my advice to those who are in law school and going to be pursuing a career is, you know, some of what I've already said about, you know, sort of understanding and being true to yourself, believing in yourself. But I think also aligning yourself with mentors as early as possible, and that starts in the law school stage. You know, identifying, you know, administrators or professors, you know, upper year students, whatever it might be, people who you feel have a vested interest in kind of encouraging you, promoting you along the way, yeah, you know, sharing opportunities with you, if ones that you might not know about. Those are those people that you meet along the way, starting in law school, can be incredibly important allies. That network of alumni or professors or administrators, it can be an incredibly important ally and springboard for future opportunities. And those relationships do kind of mitigate the sort of imposter syndrome that sometimes goes along with being in law school.
Thank you. Yeah, imposter syndrome is definitely something that I've struggled with myself personally, and a lot of my friends have as well. So it's something that I'm still kind of working on, you know, battling against. And it's great to, you know, have a wonderful network of friends at the law school that I can rely on, like Serene. So as you mentioned, it's, you know, really important to have that kind of network of support. And Maria or Cherie, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to this as well.
Oh, this resonated big time with me. I'm yes, longtime sufferer of major imposter syndrome all the time. And I think Justice Maxwell said it all perfectly well in terms of you have to surround yourself with people that do believe in you, with a mentor that's willing to invest in you, with friends, you know, like sometimes I've been in different work environments or different social groups where it actually like the people amplify it and it gets worse. And then I've been in environments where people are really supportive and it kind of dies down, and you, after a conversation with those group of friends, you feel more confident. And for me, like this is amazing, but that group for me is my U of T law class, who I maybe see in person once every year at best, sometimes every couple years, but it's amazing. Like that crew of my friends that I went to law school with, I think just because of the nature of, you know, the program being so intense, we became so close. And the women that I went to school with, one of whom is Rita Maxwell, who's awesome. Just like is just a super supportive group that understands each other. And when I have an issue at work and I call one of them up, at the end of that conversation, I feel empowered to stand up for myself, to, you know, I see my value much more. And it's really important to find that group of people 100%. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cherie, if you wanted to add anything.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate what was said on this topic. I mean, I think something that I would want to share is that I've felt like I always had the trouble with this one, but I think I felt like I kind of had to leave my, you know, the female part of me at the door in many ways in order, like through my practice. And, you know, what ended up happening was a ton of sacrifice. I felt, you know, I was practicing at a time, or I'm still am practicing, but, you know, when I was, you know, working in the commercial real estate space, there were not a lot of female mentors to look to. And those who were the female mentors around, you know, were really, they had it, you know, much more difficult, a much harder time than myself, right? And so I really felt like I had to check all that at the door and just be all in work, you know, very work driven. And the thing to share on that topic is that I really feel like I made some major sacrifices, right? So I never I just actually got married last year. First time, so married at 47 is a pretty big sacrifice, right? To be, not having put, got my family piece organized on that front. So, I would really say the biggest challenge was that work-life balance piece. I think I was absolutely terrified to have children. And I really felt like if I did, everything would fall apart. So where I came away with this was that if people, really feel inclined in the same way, it's up to everyone, to choose their own path. But, I really feel like I should have got to the doctor a few years earlier. I should have really just understood, what my options were earlier, because, by the time I started looking into things, it was too late for me. Happily, though, I'm married now and I have 3 stepchildren, and they're all in their teens. And so it's just a whole new chapter that's opened up for me, a whole new journey, a whole new opportunity. So, you just don't know how life is gonna unfold. But there's things I would have done differently at a younger age if I could have.
Thank you all so much for being so open and honest with that question. We really appreciated hearing all of your perspectives on that. You've all certainly inspired us today so much. So I don't know if you could maybe tell us a little bit about who inspired you in your journey.
I think we'd all
I can jump in quickly on this. Oh, you go ahead.
No,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Cherie.
Oh, okay. Thank you. You know what, for me, it's been very interesting. I absolutely think it's important to have, identify those mentors and then search them out and stay close. But for me, an incredible mentor has been Roberta Jameson. So she came in and spoke to our class. I think I was in first year law school, and I've just never, ever forgotten that moment, forgotten how I felt. I've just absolutely identified with how she impacted me in her words, and, have really just tracked my life, always staying in touch with understanding, where she is at and what's she doing. So Roberta Jameson, I would say, has been an absolute inspiration. But I would say that other people, are just going to inspire you along the way, and you need to know that about yourself. And if that happens, you need to follow up, connect with them. Like, that's sort of the following your instincts piece. It's really being in touch. It, could be for any reasons, big or small, but you got to stick with that. There's always a reason why that happens.
Thank you so much. We'll move on to Maria next.
Okay, so if I think about who inspires me, I just think about, like, who do I think of when I have to overcome something difficult or I want to pursue a big goal? Who's the person that showed me that that's possible? And I think for me, up until fairly recently, that was probably the number one person or people were the women in my own family. We come from hardy stock, us Ukrainian women. My grandmother is a Holocaust survivor. She was a chemist in the Soviet Union in the 50s. Like, I don't know if you can have a tougher time than that. She immigrated twice and, has started her life over. And I just think about that. And then I go and look at my problem and I go, yeah, we can manage that. And then, that she's 92 years old now. And so that's on that end of the spectrum of the women in my family. And then lately it's been on the opposite end. My daughter is a cancer survivor who has accomplished more in 10 years of life than pretty much most human beings. She's been on TV. She does talks at universities. She's just like a super kick-ass girl that inspires me. And when I look at the struggle that she has gone through and how well she's doing, and I look at my goal and it all of a sudden looks really attainable. So sometimes it's just like the ordinary people, as Cherie says, sometimes it's like a celebrity or a famous person doing something and you think, oh, that's cool. But a lot of times it's kind of like the least expected person that just from day-to-day life. So that's what it's been for me.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Maria. Justice Maxwell.
You know, it's a bit of both of what Maria and Cherie said. Family absolutely is an inspiration. I have tried to, you know, live by the example that my mom and dad set in their lives. You know, the way that they faced challenges and adversities, like in a very fearless way, and without compromise of their values. It's not an easy road to live that way, and their, you know, sort of unflappable commitment to fighting for things that they are right and need to be corrected. I always found very inspiring, and I still do. Trailblazers, you know, Roberta Jameson certainly is an example of one, but you know, other people who were fearless in their pursuit of being, you know, the first to do something or to take on an issue that, you know, had challenged others in the past and hadn't been resolved. You know, there's so many, and I won't name individual people, but you know, I certainly have met many lawyers, judges, academics along the way who I consider to be real trailblazers, who pursue their interests and work with great passion and with fearlessness. And I do find that incredibly inspiring. And I'll say lastly, and I don't, you know, mean this at all in a cheesy way. I was at an event last night at U of T that was in celebration of International Women's Day, and it was sort of a dinner and chat. And I met a whole bunch of 1, 2, 3L students and LLMs, all women. And I was inspired to be among this next generation of lawyers. It is incredibly sort of reassuring to see, you know, the diversity of perspectives in a room, to hear, you know, women speaking very confidently about their goals, their ideas, their vision for themselves and where they want to see themselves in the legal world. You know, from where I sit now, as somebody who's on the bench, looking out at counsel, you know, representing the interests of justice, it is incredibly inspiring to know that this next generation that's coming up are, you know, incredibly talented, skilled, confident students, and you know, over half of them are women. I do find that very inspiring.
Great, thank you all so much for that. Just looking at the time, I think we do have time for maybe one more quick question from the Q&A. So one of our attendees has asked, what advice would you give to your younger self who is just starting out on their professional path, particularly for someone asking as a 23-year-old immigrant who is just starting their life and legal career in Canada? And maybe Maria, if you wanted to start with this one.
Sure. So I think, you know, that really kind of jives with my experience, just the whole immigrant side and not really having super strong ties to the community. I think one of the things that has been really helpful is getting involved in things that do build those connections. My friends at U of T really enjoyed mocking me because I'm a sorority girl. So I joined a sorority in undergrad, and it was partly to play on the sports teams for free, but it was also because I wanted to build my network. Like, I'm not going to apologize about that. And it was important to me. I didn't grow up and have a lot of, you know, friends of my parents' kids. Like, I see it all the time now, even for my own children, how different it is for them than it was for me. So, you know, I joined a sorority, I joined different clubs, I went to all kinds of events, and I participated in these mentorship programs as a mentee to try and build as many connections in the profession as possible. So I think that's really important, number one. And the second thing I would say is that when you're kind of like walking into this, at least for me, not having a lot of prior conversations or knowledge about it, I sort of felt like I was kind of wandering a little bit lost sometimes. And like I mentioned before, kind of the choices that I made were guided by the path of least resistance, not necessarily by what I truly wanted. And only kind of several years into my career did I sit down and actually write down the filter through which I wanted to pursue things. And those would be like the values that are important to me. And those were, my values then, and I review them regularly. Every year or so I go through and I look, are these still the things that really matter to me? And it has been such a huge help to me, like the most recent set of values that I wrote down for myself last year were that I wanted to connect with people, I wanted to help my community, and I wanted mutual respect. And so the choices that I've made about the things that I attend, the people that I connect with, events that I choose to go to or not go to, it's much easier to filter through, like, does this really line up with what my values are? And your values are going to be unique to you based on your experience and who you are. And if you know that about yourself, I think that your success will be like, more targeted, because you're not going to be like me in the beginning, kind of jumping around, like thinking, oh, I'll do that or this, or like that's available, so yes. It will be much more thought through and purposeful, and I think that might be helpful.
That's really great to hear and very helpful for sure. Cherie or Justice Maxwell, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything to this question.
I would just say quickly, I feel like everything you said, Maria, I just absolutely agree. Like, and obviously I didn't have, I'm originally from Canada, did not have an immigrant type experience, but I love the way you said that. So totally agree.
Thank you.
I agree, absolutely. And, I think Maria touched on this already, but I think for someone in the position of the person who asked the question as, immigrant or son or daughter of an immigrant, and maybe some, sense of not sort of belonging within a law school community or within a legal community, don't assume, right, that there's no space for you or that there aren't mentors out there. Every time you come to an event like this, every time there's an opportunity to interact with the members of the profession, there's an opportunity to make a connection and develop a mentorship relationship with somebody. And that's, I think, really important to being able to visualize yourself in this arena. And I guess that's the second part of what I would say is, visualize yourself doing the role, whatever it might be. Don't, it shouldn't be the kind of thing where, you think about someone being a lawyer, but you can't actually visualize it being you. That's part of just sort of the self-belief piece. And if you don't have a network of people who are already in the law and who've already been kind of helping you think about yourself in that way, you do have to work a little harder to make sure you're reminding yourself that, yes, indeed, you can do this. And yes, indeed, there are people out there who will champion you, but you got to believe it first. So, whether it's just a mental exercise of picturing yourself doing certain things that you think would be amazing things to do in law, or it's, having a list like Maria described of things that you want to be doing by a certain time or a certain place, or just chatting with friends and family, or just thinking quietly about, what it is that you want to do as a person in the community. And that will help you to sort of take that visualization and, sort of put it into action by, developing relationships and mentorships and joining, getting involved, and it kind of starts happening in an organic way. So that's what I would add on.
Thank you all so much. All of your responses, both to that question and today in the panel, have just been so inspiring for all of us. Justice Maxwell mentioned Trailblazer earlier on, and that's certainly the way that we feel about all of you here today. So we really appreciate for not only you coming out today, but everything that you've done for the legal profession and for up and coming law students like ourselves. So thank you all so much. And with that, we will conclude our International Women's Day panel.